Well, welcome everybody. My name is Pastor Stephanie Haskins, and I'm joined today for a conversation on resilience and anxiety with a member of Niantic Community Church, Sue Thomson. We're going to have a conversation about something that I think a lot of people are dealing with, which is anxiety. And Sue has had a long journey with anxiety and has come a long way with it. And let me say, by way of introduction, this is part of our resilience series. So resilience, I think my favorite definition of resilience is the ability to spring back from challenges. And it really is in that elasticity that our capacity to overcome or to spring back from challenges grows. So I think Sue and I have had a couple of conversations about anxiety over the couple of years that I've been here. And I'm always interested in hearing how, I'm interested in a lot of things, but I'm always interested in how people have nuanced journeys with things that they deal with over the course of their lives. And of course, because we're talking about an aspect of mental health and emotional health today, I personally always recommend getting help. I think that will probably be a message that Sue will give. So please reach out to counselors, to your primary care doctor, to your pastor. I can recommend folks in our community. There is help for anxiety. And I just wanted to say that at the offset. So welcome, Sue.
Thank you.
I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you said yes to this. And I trust that this conversation will bless both of us and bless anyone who watches it. So Sue, I actually am going to start with a question I didn't prepare you for. So sorry.
That's okay.
But I wanted to know, because we were talking a little bit before I pressed record, about the fact that I mean, you've had a really long journey with anxiety. And you were saying to me that you didn't even know what the word was for the experiences that you were having.
Right.
So when did you discover that that anxiety was actually anxiety for you? It was a thing, and not just an inevitable part of your makeup. Can you speak to that?
I was probably well into my 20s before I put a word to it. And I probably put a word to it because my mother had been given medication for anxiety and had a conversation with her about what had precipitated that. And she had never really talked about her anxiety. Was a child of the 20s, so you didn't talk about these things. And that was when I began to realize where I was. But by that time, I was married and living away from my parents and had some conversations with my mother about it. But not probably until I was in my 30s did she and I discuss our mutual anxiety journeys. So up until, like I said, maybe my early to mid 20s, it was just this gripping thing that would happen to me, and in pretty unpredictable fashion, because there are days that I can do things and say things and walk through life in a way that doesn't feel anxious. And there are other days that the exact same schedule, tasks, routine will be almost paralyzing. And there are places in my life where anxiety almost doesn't exist. I'm able to live at a level that is functional and calm and successful. And there are many people in those aspects of my life who have never had an idea that this is part of my life's journey. Until recently, when I started talking about it a lot.
I can't imagine what it's like to not even know, to not even know when your anxiety might emerge, given the fact that, I mean, you were just saying that you can be doing the same set of things or having the same set of experiences. And your experience of that experience one day might be normal or calm, and another day might be anxious. That adds a whole other level of uncertainty to the experience of anxiety.
Yeah, I can remember days, many days as a middle school and high school student that I would go to school and not speak to a single person all day. And at the same time, I was involved in 2 youth organizations where I was a confident participant, a leader. And I would go from school to those activities, and I would just step into that world and be okay. And the next morning I would be back at school with my mouth closed and just walking through life, not living my life at school. I can remember middle school and particularly being virtually paralyzed some days, that I would have almost out of body experiences having to go from one end of the building to the other, because I had to be in the hallway with people that I didn't know how to address. How do I talk to them? What do I say if someone speaks to me? It was very consuming. So the older I got, the more skills I got in managing that. And I reached a point as a teenager and then a young adult that I could go into settings where I wasn't sure how it would be. And I could at least appear just what I hoped was quiet and shy. I suspect it sometimes came off as arrogant and not interested in anyone else. But you learn coping skills. And I mean, even today, I can walk into a setting that I'm unfamiliar with and not know which me is going to show up. Is the anxiety going to kick in, or is it going to be okay? And there's no predicting it. There's just riding the wave. And now I know I'm okay, whichever way it is. I didn't know that at 15 or 30.
So what is your experience of anxiety? How do you actually experience it? Is it mental? Is it physical, emotional? Is it all those things?
It is all of those things. Physically, I have gone as far as full panic attacks, one of which sent me to the hospital because the symptoms were exactly that of a classic heart attack. Numbness in my left arm, my tongue was swelling, I was sweating profusely, and it was terrifying. I was about 35 and had 2 young children, and I was terrified. Most of the time, it's far less dramatic, but it's definitely an increased heart rate. Sometimes some visible shakiness. I like to wear things with pockets so I can put my hands in them. It calms me to do that and makes it less obvious. And then I also have the distractedness of I can't focus on the task because I'm focusing on what's happening here. So when I'm supposed to be, in a meeting or a work group or something that I'm actively trying to pursue a subject, it's difficult to do that because I'm obsessed with where I am emotionally. So it's a combination of all of those factors.
Yeah. And so it sounds like you said, like, mentally there's like this fixation on what's happening kind of physically and emotionally. So that's distracting from being in the present moment and kind of, as you said, focusing on the task.
Yes, and mostly the preoccupation is that I don't want anybody else to see it.
Yeah.
Trying to keep it within myself so that I appear, calm and cool to everybody else, and they can't see the tension or the nervousness or whatever it is in me. That I want them to look at me as, somebody who's present and competent and engaged. Of course, the irony is the more I focus on trying to appear that way, the worse it gets.
Right. Right. No, that makes sense to me. I'm so veering from my script, but I want to follow this conversation. I hope you don't mind. Well, I just wondered then, I mean, there's just, so what I've discovered in these resilience conversations, and I mentioned that this is the third one I've had, that vulnerability comes up again and again and again. That resilience is all about vulnerability, how we kind of manage vulnerability, and being anxious is sounds very vulnerable. And I'm wondering, like, who was the first, because you also said something so powerful, again, this is before our conversation started to be recorded, about feeling like an other, like knowing that, feeling inside yourself, this kind of breaks my heart, but feeling inside of yourself as a kid that you were other. How early in your life, how old do you think you were when you started to feel that way?
I think it started probably around fourth grade. So I would have been 9, 10. And there was a precipitating event. I had been tested for a TAG program, a talent and gifted program. And they had not put me in it in third grade when most kids started because I appeared very shy and they weren't sure I would thrive in the setting. But my academics in third grade, I just kind of walked through because I needed the challenge of different academics. And so in fourth grade, they moved me into that group. But the social groups had already formed in the group that had started a year before me. And now I've left behind the group that I was with in third grade. And so I didn't know where to fit in. And I remember very much then trying to reconnect with friends from first, second grade, but they had made new friends because in grade school, we're very much governed by who we sit next to in the classroom. But I couldn't hang on to my third grade friends either. So that was kind of the beginning of it. It became tougher in middle school. I went to a 6th, 7th, 8th school, even back in the 60s. And I was the first group that went there as a 6th grader. And so it was daunting. It was this huge school. I went to in a school district that had 12 elementary schools, 2 junior highs, and 1 high school. So I went from a fairly small elementary school to half of the town in my 6th grade. And I knew almost no one. And so the isolation increased then. By high school, it really wasn't much worse because I had a group of friends from the youth groups that I was active in. And so I took those relationships with me. I didn't see those kids much in school, but when I saw them around campus, there was a comfort, and that helped. But it is that sense of knowing that I wasn't functioning the way everybody else was goes back to probably 10 years old.
Who was the first person that you let see your anxiety, or that you trusted with that? With that,
boy, that's hard. I don't really know. I think I kept it so much to myself as much as I could. I don't even think that I shared it all that much with my husband. The couple of conversations he and I had about it, it was completely alien to him. He thought it was something that I could think myself out of. If I chose not to worry or be concerned about things, then I wouldn't. He has grown a lot over the years in that, but he was in his 20s when we got married as well, and it was completely alien to him. He didn't know how to respond to it, and there weren't any real public discourses on mental health at all. So I think one of the first people that I actually opened up to about it, my mother and I began having conversations about it, and it was comforting to know that it wasn't just me. Mm-hmm. But outside of the family, there was a woman I knew through a church that we attended many, many years ago. And I shared more my vulnerability than my anxiety with her. Mm-hmm. And she was, I'm not going to even name her, but I'm going to tell you that she is now a member of Niantic. And we've reconnected a bit. But she was so kind and so affirming that it gave me some inner peace. Mm-hmm. And I will say, one of the people that I confided in the most openly was the doctor at the emergency room when I went in that night with the heart attack symptoms. You know, a young intern on the night shift. And I poured out my heart to him. And he said all the right things. He said, the good news is there's nothing wrong with your heart. He said, and the good news is there's nothing wrong with you. This is perfectly normal. There are many, many people who deal with this all the time. I want you to take a deep breath. I want you to know that you're okay. And that was so relieving to me. Mm-hmm. And I'll be honest, I never had a panic attack at anywhere near that level again. And I think it was his affirmation, his compassion that did that for me, that this total stranger whose name I never knew, who I've never seen again, has 30 some years later stayed with me. And I mean, it was such a gift to me that I sat there and cried. It was just such a relief to hear somebody saying, it's okay. People feel this way. Mm-hmm. And, you know, he recommended that I see somebody, and I followed up on it. He did all the right things medically and professionally, but mostly he listened and he was compassionate. Mm-hmm. And since then, on an increasing level, I have shared my anxiety with people who I thought needed to know, people that I saw, they seemed to be feeling the way I had felt in many situations, when I would have wished that somebody had said to me, boy, I've gone through that too. And once I turned 60, one of my gifts to myself was being completely open. It was like, okay, this is me. I'm 60 years old, and I need to own who I am. And I'm not all strengths and abilities. I have weakness and foibles, and hopefully my saying that can be of benefit to somebody else. And very, very recently, a woman that I've known for close to 40 years had shared something with me we were texting about something, just a stress that she's going through in her family life. And she said, you're going to laugh at me, but I get very nervous and worked up. I said, I'm not going to laugh at you. I said, if it helps to know, I am a person who has dealt with anxiety since childhood. I have, during a couple of times in my life, had medication for it. I almost never take it, but it sits in my nightstand, and I have a couple in my purse in case I need it. Knowing I have it often means I don't need it. Mm-hmm. And she actually said, can I call you? And she called me and she said, you can't know what that feels like that you shared that with me. And we had a lovely chat, and she said that her husband doesn't understand. She can't talk about it to her daughters. And we just had a wonderful conversation. So sharing it with people has been an ongoing process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the older I get, the more important I understand it is to share, not only because it helps others, but because it releases the pressure in me.
Mm.
It's like a boiling pot. If you keep the lid on, eventually it's going to boil over. And when I can say to somebody, this is uncomfortable for me, or I'm very anxious about it. Like I told you at the very beginning, when we first started talking before we were recording, I said, my anxiety is kicked in today.
Yep.
Calm down.
Mm-hmm.
But probably 10 years ago, I wouldn't have said that. And I would have sat here trying to mask it. But by saying it, by verbalizing it, I was able to move on. Didn't disappear, but I was able to put it in its place, set it aside.
So it sounds like one of the things, like it's just thinking about what I'm hearing from you, is one of the things that really has helped is to acknowledge it to yourself and to acknowledge it to others. And it's interesting that you even said like it's sitting in your throat. It's just like it's like something that wants to be acknowledged, wants to come forward and out. And it doesn't necessarily magically go away when you do that, but it just can be there as opposed to like running the show. Is that a piece of it? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think I think acknowledging it to myself was actually a bigger hurdle than acknowledging it to others. Because if I said it out loud, said it to me out loud in my head, it became real. And it became something that ought to be dealt with. You know, it ought to be talked about with a doctor. It ought to be, you know, shared openly. But if I didn't acknowledge it to myself, it almost didn't exist, except obviously it did.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But both of them have been critically important to me, acknowledging it to myself and then being able to share it with others. And as I said, that's not just for me, but I think it's also been helpful to some of the friends that I've shared it with, and even some more casual acquaintances, just in conversations where, you know, a subject about their child being anxious. And my being able to say, look, I grew up as an anxious child. Back then, nobody acknowledged it. Nobody even thought about doing it. And probably in fairness to my parents, home was one of my safe places. So I probably didn't appear anxious at home. And teachers at that time weren't trained to look for mental health concerns in children. If they were doing okay academically, that's what mattered. And I was doing okay. My grades weren't falling off. I wasn't, they really didn't care that I didn't open my mouth from beginning of class to the end. So I don't fault my parents for not knowing or noticing, but I'm glad I can say to another parent, don't make your child's anxiety invisible. Acknowledge it, honor it enough so that he or she can see that you see it in them. Growing up, we've had very open dinner table discussions on mental health, anxiety. I'm going back now as an adult, I can see my mother's anxiety and periods of actual depression that she went through, and wishing for her that she had gotten the help that she could have used and would have probably enriched her life in ways that we'll never know. And I know she must have felt very, very alone in it. She was an only child, and until we were adults, she never acknowledged it to us kids. So we've had conversations that this is, these things tend to be genetic. So, a bad day is one thing, but a chronic occurrence of tension, anxiety should never be overlooked. And my experience is that sometimes talking about it is all you need to get to a functional level. It is important, though, to know when that's not working and you need to speak to someone in, either a counseling way or medical, however it needs to be. It goes up and down. And so you need to know where you are and what kind of help is waiting for you or what you should reach out for.
And if it's not too personal, Sue, how do you know when you need to go to the next level of care for yourself?
It's usually a physical thing. I start having trouble sleeping. I find myself distracted and unfortunately kind of cranky with people around me. And then if it's been a few days, I can reflect on it and say, okay, we're getting to a level. I mean, I'll be honest, at the beginning of shutting down for COVID, I was very stressed. I was in that vulnerable age group. It was, something that I've never lived through. And I just happened to have a Zoom visit with my primary care doctor. And I almost didn't say it, but I said, look, I'm starting to have some issues with sleeping. I'm distracted during the day. I used to have a prescription that would help me get through. And she said, would you like me to write you a prescription? And I said, I would. And I actually saw her yesterday. She had written me a prescription for 10 tablets and I could take 2 a day. And she said, so how are you doing? I noticed this hasn't been refilled. I said, I took 1. I said, I wrestled with myself. Did I need it? I said, but I know I have them. And if I need them, I can take them. But sometimes just that level of knowing I have it is enough. But so I knew when I talked to her that I needed to make myself ask. She had not been my doctor when I had any other big issues with anxiety. So she didn't know anything about my history. So I had to initiate that, which was a challenge. Mm-hmm. But I'm glad I did. I will say I had a pastor at a previous church who I was in a prayer group. And one of his prayers is actually, it's very reminiscent of how you start worship services and things, the breathing. And it always takes me back to what he taught us. And we would start every group that we did focusing on inhaling and exhaling. And he encouraged us to say either verbally or to ourselves something on the inhale and the exhale. And he's, said, if you don't know what else to say, he said, Jesus, come in on the inhale, and whatever you need out, stress, tension, anger, fear, on the exhale. And what I've found over the last 15 or 20 years after he taught me that prayer is that if that prayer isn't managing it, I know I need additional help. Mm-hmm. Because that prayer for me has been such a gift. And it's a gift I've shared with a number of people. When I worked for many years at a Catholic school, and I had a couple of friends there who, very devout, had very strong prayer practices, but were going through things in their lives. And I offered them that prayer, even though I wasn't Catholic. Mm-hmm. 2 of them in particular were very grateful for what it did for them. And I remember while I was still working there, I tracked down that former pastor and emailed him and told him that his gift was still giving.
I love that. Well, you've kind of already segued us into kind of our last topic, which is the role that faith has had in your journey with anxiety? And of course, that's ongoing. All this stuff is ongoing. Yeah,
Yes,
it's part of resilience, right? Yeah.
absolutely.
Hmm.
Well, I think it took me being open to sharing with somebody in my faith life that I had anxiety, for my faith life to help me with it. Because as long as I, went to worship service and busied myself on committees and teaching Sunday school, I was going through a lot of motions and a lot of activity, but I really wasn't letting myself be faithful.
Mm.
I it, and it took having a friend or any one of two or three different pastors that I've met through the years where I've been able to open up a little bit and reveal that chink in my armor. And then I've been able to allow my faith practices in. And I will say the better I am about my prayer life and my focus on trying to be faithful, do the right things for the right reasons, the less anxious I am. And as I said, that one prayer for me will always connect my faith to my mental health, to my personal well-being. That prayer got me through the loss of my older sister. I guess I must have known that prayer longer than 15 or 20 years, because she's been gone 21. And that prayer held me together and kept me connected to my faith during the months before and after her death. So for me, that's a huge link. And I almost never say it the same way twice. It's what I need in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's just the breathing. Sometimes it's just inhale and exhale. And I trust God to know what needs to come in and what needs to go out.
Mm-hmm. I love that. So I love that we've ended on this really beautiful and practical note. I really do, because I think Jesus come in on the inhale and something leaves on the exhale is a tool that anyone who's dealing with anxiety, which I think during COVID is most people at some time, right? You can have acute experiences of anxiety. You can have chronic experiences of anxiety. You can have situational experiences with anxiety, right? But that prayer, yeah, go ahead.
I've had them all.
You've had some people have the whole thing. Um, but that deep prayer connected to breathing and to just asking God to literally come into our being and to release the things that we need to release is so beautiful. I thank you for the time that you've spent. As I said before, it is so meaningful to have these conversations, and I trust that this conversation will find the people that it needs to find. And I thank you, and I hope this will also mean that more people in our congregation or beyond might reach out to share their own stories of anxiety and resilience. So thank you, and God bless you, Sue Thomson.
Thank you, Pastor Stephanie. It's been good. I'm glad we talked.
Me too. Thank you so much.